Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. We're going to give just a minute for folks to log on, and then we will go ahead and get started. All right, we're going to take just a moment more for folks to log on. We know it takes a minute for people to get through the Eventbrite portal. And so we're going to take just a moment of wait time, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, I see that we have a few more people coming into the room. If you're just joining us, we are taking just a minute or so of wait time to let people come into the room, get settled, get a glass of water, whatever you might need to do to make yourself comfortable. And we will get started here in just a minute. Okay, it looks like we have a lot of you in the room, so let's go ahead and get started. First, I want to start by saying that it is only Tuesday, and it has already been a week. It's been a lot. So school started yesterday for a lot of families, which I'm sure brought all sorts of anxieties, whether it was going back in person or families managing remote learning. I'm sure that brought a lot of stress and anxiety for folks. And then on Sunday, we have yet another unarmed Black man who was shot by police, this time with his children in the car watching. And yesterday was the hottest day yet of the year here in Chicago in the mid-90s. So I think it's fair to say that only on the second day of the week, we probably all need a lot more than a deep breath, but I want to start us there. At VOCEL, we teach children to do what we call balloon breaths because, as many of you probably know, just saying calm down to a 2 or 3-year-old typically isn't all that effective. As I look back on this spring and summer, I think I probably could have used a lot more balloon breaths. So I'm going to ask that you all humor me. I can't see your faces, but I hope that you'll do this one with me. So for a balloon breath, we put our hands on our head. We breathe in and we inflate the balloon. And then we let the air out and deflate the balloon. Okay, so hopefully you're feeling centered and feeling ready to go. So first, an enormous thank you to you for joining today. Today is the third webinar in our Masterclass series. And this one feels really special because it was added by popular demand following my conversation with Keela a few weeks ago that was titled Seeing Color. And in that session, Keela provided a really amazing presentation about racism and identity development. And we heard from the people who logged on that they wanted more time with this topic, and especially more time to spend on the practical guidance. So we brought Keela Guyton back and we added Jordan Landfair to the party so that they can answer our questions about how to talk with children about race. So before we begin, I want to thank our lead sponsors for this event in this series, Lindy and Michael Kaiser, and Lindy Hirschstone and Chris Coetzee. And both of their families are really longtime supporters of VOCEL and have especially helped to champion this Masterclass series, bringing experts right into each of our homes. And because we have a great turnout for today's session, and many of you who came today are new to VOCEL, first I want to give you a warm welcome and share a quick intro to the work we do and why. So VOCEL stands for Viewing Our Children as Emerging Leaders. And our mission is to help ensure every child has the foundation to learn, grow, and lead. So we work towards that with our 2Gen programs, which includes our flagship Child Parent Academy. And the core of our work really focuses on children ages 0 to 5 and the adults and environments that most impact them. So we think about parents, grandparents, caregivers, teachers, school principals, and other people and environments where children grow up. And we believe at VOCEL that 1, parents are children's first teachers, and 2, that a better foundation leads to a brighter future. So to cultivate that better foundation, VOCEL is committed to getting the tools and the knowledge and the support into the hands of those people who are really best positioned to shape those little ones' brains. I'm Jessie Ilhart. I co-founded VOCEL and I lead our program and innovation work. And I think it's important to know also that I'm a preschool teacher at heart and also mom to a 3-year-old. So I'm going to introduce our guest experts in just a moment, but first I want to share this quote by Ibram Kendi. And it reads, "Do we ever ask how young is too young to talk to a kid about kindness or love or respect? No, we read books to kids about love when they're coming out of the womb because we want them to love. That's what we want. We should be doing the same thing with being anti-racist." So that's really what we're here to talk about today. And in this chat, in this session, we're going to dig into what might be leading us to, maybe nod vigorously while reading or hearing that quote, and at the same time, maybe feel like we're not ready to talk about it yet. What are those forces at play? So a few details you should know. First, we are recording this webinar. So yes, you can take notes if you'd like, but know that we will send out the recording afterwards. We also have a pretty wide range of people on this call from looking at the registration. So we have parents, we have grandparents, we have people who don't have kids or don't have them yet. We have white parents, Black parents, parents of color, people with babies, toddlers, older kids, teenagers. And with all of those different identities or others I haven't mentioned, I think comes really different lived experiences. So I imagine that some of the ideas we'll cover today or that Keela or Jordan might mention could be old hat for you, and some might be totally new and eye-opening for someone else. So I hope and really think that everyone will take something of value from today's chat. And then finally, the Q&A button. That's really important, specifically for this masterclass. We've had some great questions in the previous sessions, but today it's not just a few minutes of audience questions, it's primarily the whole time. So we have some questions on deck to get us started, but no need to wait until the end of the session. If you have questions that you want answered, you can click that button at the bottom of your screen. Don't need to be shy. Put your question out there. Chances are that someone else is probably thinking about it too. So, okay, let's go ahead and bring our guests on screen. So Keela and Jordan, if you could turn your videos on. There's Jordan and there's Keela. Hi guys.
Hi.
So first we have Keela Guyton. So Keela is a leader in the early childhood development field. She holds a master's in public policy and a bachelor's degree in business management. And she started as a Head Start classroom teacher. She became a trainer, moved into program management, administration, policy shaping, community systems development. She's done it all. And she is also a racial justice trainer. And I think I would be remiss to say that she is also mom to a new college student. So pat yourself on the back for that, Keela. Not an easy time to be transitioning to college. And we also have Jordan Landfair. Jordan currently serves as the manager of academic and social emotional supports for the Golden Apple Foundation. He's a former public school educator, philanthropic board member, and community organizer. Fun fact, he's been a teacher in multiple states in the US and overseas in the United Arab Emirates, and also dad to a little one who just started school, not quite college, a little one who started preschool. So today we're bringing the parent love, we're bringing the educator love. Okay, you both ready to dive in?
Let's do this.
All right, great. So first, let's just start with getting to know you. So can you tell us a little more about who you are and what you bring to this work? And let's start with Keela.
Sure. So great introduction. Thank you, Jessie. I am Keela. So if you were to ask my friends who I was, they would say that I am someone who is compassionate. I love people. Though I'm an introvert, I do draw energy from people who have like minds and also who are very different from me. At the end of the day, at the very bottom of who I am, my foundation, I try my best to be a good human, a good person. I'm a lifelong learner. I do my absolute best to surround myself with different types of people from different identities. And so that's who I am. That's who I have really emerged and grown to become, I'd say, over the last 3.5, 4 years. And I think the greatest of all of that good stuff that I think that I am, I'm a mom, and my entire life changed 18 years ago. I was fast tracking in business management and banking and had a whole management career set out for myself. But when I found out about brain growth and development, I completely switched and went into early childhood and, you know, other positions in that whole field. But I try my best to display that to other people. I am curious. Some people say intellectually curious. I have a spirit of inquiry, and that's me. And that's a little bit of my journey. The reason why this topic is important to me is because growing up, I have parents who are from the deep South. My mom and dad are from rural Mississippi, and all of her siblings, there were about 10 to 11 of them. And watching them growing up, I know that they would have had to experience some racism in their times, but they did never really articulate it until I became an adult and I started to ask questions. And so I understood through them, and then in other environments, like in education, in the workplace, that there was this phenomenon kind of happened around me, this weird sort of energy, aggressions, microaggressions, and I couldn't articulate it. I couldn't name it. And so this work became extremely important to me to learn about it, some of the behaviors that sort of happened around racism, and then it blew me into like systemic oppression and structural racism and, you know, all of that. And so I've been over the last 3.5 years just really trying to unpack that and learn more about it and bring people into the journey as well with me. That's me in a nutshell.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Jordan, go for it.
So whenever I do these activities or I'm in these spaces, the number one thing I can tell people I'm Jamila's dad, and that means the world to me. I have all of the don't cry, be, you know, as tough as possible, but I will never forget, I wept when my daughter was born. And look, the people who always ask, like, oh, am I gonna let my child? It's like, no, I'm gonna be cool, be tough. It was like just bawling like a baby. And I think about the reason I tell everyone, first off, I'm Jamila's dad, is the way that I cried when she was born. That was a life that I had to protect. That was a life that just busted into the room. Say hi.
Love it.
All right. So, I mean, this is the whole new identity I got to take on, because my job, my goal is to make sure that I make it home every day, that she lives in a world where she can go to school. Yes, love. Okay. Do you want to say your name? What's your name? Okay. So I need to think about all of the opportunities that she can have, all of the avenues that I want open to her. And at the same time, we know, just because of who I am and who her grandparents are, who her lineage is, will inherently be cut off from her. I'm Patty's son, so I watched my mom work across the street. Hold on, baby. My mom worked at Pekin Uniform Rental, which was across the street from the projects over on 41st and State. And that was where, you know, I didn't have a lot growing up. We never had an abundance, but you haven't fully understood the intersection of housing and poverty and race and disenfranchisement until you've seen what our public housing projects look like, until you've watched people work their, you know, hands and feet, everything they can to still not have anything. And those are the things that I carry with me. And so when I look at a world that I have to navigate and be in and love in and raise this one who is snatching all of my pens in, you've got to carry yourself a little harder. You've got to stand up a little straighter, but you've also got to be hopeful. So those are kind of the spaces that I occupy.
That's great. Thank you. It's so helpful to know a little more about who you are and what you're bringing in terms of some of those motivations to this conversation. I'm curious to start with just a general question about your go-to recommendations or advice for families who want to talk with their children more about race. And I think we have a racially diverse audience with us today, so you can feel free to get specific here about, specifically for Black parents of Black children, or white parents with white children, or multiracial families, or if you have experienced any sort of universal truths when it comes to talking with kids about race. But what are some of your go-to recommendations? Either of you who wants to start?
I think my biggest one is your words are great. They're watching what you do. They're watching what you buy. They're watching what you consume, what you bring into your house. My daughter has been going through, in full transparency, a lot of issues around her hair. And when you really sit back and look at it, what dolls did we bring into the house that looked just like her? And so we can preach these messages of, you're beautiful, the world has to be this way, we validate and appreciate you, but when your kids are sitting at home, or when you're laying down and you're reading books to them, do they see people that look like them? Do they see people that are positively represented that don't look like them? How do they see themselves navigating the world, and how are you navigating the world? Because parents are the example that they're going to look to.
So yeah,
Sheila, what would you add?
Yeah, I would add, it's definitely modeling it and being that example. So I feel like we're almost putting the cart before the horse if we want our children to be anti-racist, and we're not. So I would say to someone who's just kind of stepping into this, you really need to be reflective and dig deep into, why and how you have conversations with yourself and then with others. Like, look at your immediate circle and who you reach out to. I had a conversation about 2 weeks ago with a friend, and I just asked her flat out, where you live, where you work, where you play, who you call, who you talk to, who is that? And it's a lot of sameness and a lot of oneness. We're all the same. We all look the same. And she happened to be a white lady that I was talking to. I said, why don't you try desegregating your space, desegregating your life, and adding some folks into that? I think that's a universal truth where we look for this, in my mind, the sameness amongst each other is the humanity. Like, where do we connect with each other outside of these other identities? I shared a little bit of that with you guys. I'm about that bottom line. I got red blood. I think you got red blood too. I don't think it's blue or pink or any other weird thing. We all breathe. We have these hearts. We have these souls. And so where is that connectivity? Where's that opportunity for me to embrace you? And I think that that's a universal truth that runs through the world. We're all looking, and I think we were built and designed to connect with each other. But there's these constructs that keep us separate from each other. So that's where we start.
I almost think about it just piggybacking off that. We live in this world, and we intuitively understand this, right? We can watch Avatar, we can watch all these movies where we understand oneness and sameness and that these divisions don't exist. And I'm saying Avatar because it came out on Netflix and it's all anyone at work wanted to talk about for a while. But we can understand social uprisings when it's the Hunger Games. We can understand that it's our choices that define us when we read Harry Potter. But then we have to bring it back to our own lives, and we come up short somehow. I was like, well, clearly, social uprising and, social rebellion is okay in that context because they're poor, they've been treated differently, everyone can understand that. But then we turn that critical lens here, and it's like, well, I just don't get it. I think that's the thing. We have the skills to do it. We just have to understand that that critical nature has to be used on our own lives as well.
Can I
go for it? Yes.
Okay, so that makes me think, Jordan, you're right. We do have that, but I think Well, to me, I think what happens, there's sort of this maybe crisis that happens in a way, like psychosocially, we have these values embedded in us, taught to us, we're socialized and conditioned to believe these certain things about, you know, our whiteness, about our blackness and our culture and the way we were raised. And so there's like this conflict of, you know, being the same as a human, which is different than being white or different than being black. I think a little bit of that kind of comes into play because we got all of this swirling around, you know, when we meet somebody new or somebody different from us, that, you know, there's kind of this thing where I don't know if I can quite connect with them. I don't know if they believe the same as me. And I think as humans, we like to feel comfortable. And it's not easy getting to know somebody else different, you know, that's not like us. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But I think like, and I know one of the questions that we have coming up is specifically how do we talk to kids around it, right? And I think the big shift that has happened is discussing things in terms of anti-Blackness and whiteness, because anti-Blackness filters itself into so many different things. Like when we talk about, you know, people of color, right? Anti-Blackness is colorism. Anti-Blackness is the rejection or the hatred of things that are seen as relating to Black people. And so in that, we have to recognize that historically speaking, whiteness exists in opposition to Blackness. And so historically speaking, right, like I love teaching history. That was my favorite. You can't teach English without teaching history. But so historically, we've had groups that have moved closer to whiteness or moved into whiteness by rejecting Blackness. And we've seen it with other groups of people. We've seen it with other marginalized people, that their social progression has come by assimilating. And so when you talk about that, what do we have that's one? There is that basic humanity, but like, I love my cultural identity. I just wish that it didn't have to come in opposition to others. And I wish that the rejection of Blackness wasn't a means of social mobility. And I think that's a thing that we talk about. How do you love yourself, right? Like, and how do you affirm your kids? How do you affirm your family without having to violently or, you know, systematically reject the otherness of people?
That's powerful and that's beautiful, because I 100,000% love being a beautiful Black woman. I love all this melanin. And as much as I talk about human flourishing, where I sit in my space and in myself, I love myself. And so I thank you for bringing that up. That's pretty powerful. That's good.
Well, it's like so even if we pose it to our the people we have in the chat, we tried affinity groups, and we got some pushback from some of our white constituents who's like, well, we need a group for ourselves. Like, okay, well, I challenge you. Like, if at the end of this week you want just a white affinity space, we'll open it up. But I want to challenge you. What other identities have you rejected in yourself because you want to opt directly into that? And we had some, well, you know, I'm actually from the suburbs, and across race, I have a similar experience with that, right? Like if I'm from Country Club Hills or I'm from Homewood, I have more in common with people of color who've grown up in those areas in some regards than just white people who've grown up in Southern Illinois. If I have physical or cognitive diversity, if I have a disability, that unites me with other people. And so I think challenging that idea of what do you fall back on when you just say whiteness, or when you just say Blackness, or when you just say these broader types that you can opt into? Like, what brings you closer to others?
So I want to come back to something that you both were raising about that critical consciousness and examining of your own experience, your own actions, right? Where do you live? Where do you work? Where do you play? But what advice would you give to white parents who are thinking to themselves, yeah, I do live in a neighborhood that's mostly white people. My kid does go to a school that's mostly white kids. What are some ways that they can back up their talk with action in a way that feels authentic, or not, you know, that doesn't just feel like they're taking action to take action? To speak more about that, if you can.
I have a point, but not really advice right now. And I can bring that in maybe if you want to start it off, Jordan.
Okay. And I see the question here about working in a Latinx middle school with a low percentage of Black students. And I think my answer, my advice at least, is the exact same. Every step forward is a step forward, right? And I think we get very complacent with our one thing. So everyone bought White Fragility. Oh, it was selling out of bookstores. Everyone bought Stamped from the Beginning. Everyone bought How to Be an Anti-Racist. And those books are still there. So it isn't enough to read them. It's now that you know that you have people that talk about those neighborhoods, that talk about those children. Did you actually read it? Did you actually get what you were supposed to? If you can still watch the news and not hear dog whistles about race, if you can still look at these things and not see yourself in them or the role that you ignoring those things play, then did you actually do the work? And so the reason I want to address that as well is anti-Blackness again. When we talk about Latinx communities, when we talk about Southeast Asian communities, it is the rejection of Blackness, whether that be skin color. So you can be Dominican and you're treated completely different. When I travel to Mexico, when I travel to, when I was in Spain, I just get downgraded to whatever the Black race is there. So it's like, I was in Oaxaca, soy Dominicano. I was like, I mean, I guess. So how are you challenging these notions of colorism? How are you affirming, again, how are you affirming your individual cultural identity, your individual personhood without doing it in opposition to others? You can say that I love my hair without saying because it's not curly or anything like that, like because you just then jumped somewhere else.
Go ahead, Keela.
No, I was just going to share an anecdote. When we started a White Fragility book club that I put together, and a lot of different identities. There was not an affinity group. And I started to ask a question because I wondered if we were just reading this book and it was just, you know, highly conceptual, a lot of theories and ideas. And I wondered if people were really internalizing it. And so I just asked a question. I was like, so, you know, when my 3 white friends that were there at the time, I was like, so for you, where does whiteness show up? Like, how did you start getting those messages really early on from your family? Try to identify and pinpoint what that was. And so, I mean, I got a lot of answers. I was like, nope. I mean, where did it happen for you? Tell me, where did it show up in you? And so they're like, well, I don't know. Well, okay, I said, all right, let's start again with where you live. How did that message about where you were in your neighborhood, what did that do for you inside? And they were like, well, we were always told that, you know, we live here because we want to be in a good neighborhood. So it hit out under class in a good neighborhood. We just want you to go to the best schools, and those best schools just happen to be white schools. And I was like, did you ever wonder or question that? And, you know, as a kid, of course not. I said, but like now, how are you internalizing that? Like, what are you doing with your children? Are you perpetuating like the same thing? Is it the same sort of cycle? And it was just the spirit of inquiry. And I wondered about that. You know, it's anti-Blackness, even though you're learning about white fragility, like right now in this space when we're talking in this book club. So like, how do you bring that in and then start to practice it? I think that there's a little bit of nervousness and resistance that starts to surface, you know, for some of my personal friends, and then maybe, you know, for the broader public. And so I think it's always recognizing, maybe naming it, and then the next space of like, how do you move into action to sort of disrupt that and change it?
It feels like what I'm hearing is that sometimes there is a desire to move into action, perhaps because that self-examination work doesn't feel as great sometimes. It's harder, right? so do we as white people skip over that in an attempt to be productive and take action, and it doesn't work, right? It doesn't get us to the depth of understanding that some of that hard self-reflection work can do.
Mhm.
Yeah. Jordan, anything to add on that?
I think one of the hardest things for a lot of us to come to grips with is once we start doing the work that we could have hurt people before. And so when I say that, I grew up, and I always use this one because it's easily digestible even for my students. I grew up with a stereotypical masculine upbringing, which means in many ways I grew up homophobic. I grew up with the idea of what it meant to be a man. I grew up with very rigid lessons in what it meant to navigate some of these communities. And so once I learned differently, you have to sit with that. It's like, oh, the way that I spoke to people could have caused harm. The way that I interacted with people could have caused harm. And that's where the work actually starts. It's really easy to look at other people and say, I see how them doing that could hurt, but you have to really look back and say, I did this. And the flip side of that is people who loved me taught me how to do this. And so it's why I think one of the biggest arguments you see people having right now is, well, what do I do about racist family members? Yeah, that's a real conversation, because it means that if you're doing the work on you, where did you learn that from? Where were you conditioned to have those things? Who are you keeping around you that's still reinforcing those values? And if you can't help them change, if you can't grow with them, then what does that mean for your relationship? Can you really be committed to this work? If the second somebody else gets shot, they say, well, it's bad that they got shot, but it's like, if we're really doing this work like we said we are, there's no but. So how do you push on that? How do you reflect on, who am I? Who was I before? How did I get there? And what changes do I need to make, not just internally, but in my social circle to move forward?
And I think last time, Jordan, that we were talking, you brought up that, not only thinking what impact does that have on you and your growth and development in this space, but what impact does that have on your children who are watching at all times, right? What decisions you make about relationships, which was a powerful moment for me thinking about that. So I'm curious to, shift gears a little bit, talking specifically about young kids. We called today's Masterclass How to Talk with Children about race, intentionally how to talk with them versus how to talk to them, because of the role that our kids play in that conversation and what we might say. So I'm curious from you, how do you think that parents should take into account their kids' ages or personalities or temperaments in how to talk with them about race or just the broader current events of our world?
So I always use this example. I think I used it last time on our call. This idea about creating a space. I do take into account temperament and personality, and what children can kind of take in, and like what age they are and where they are developmentally. So with my daughter, I always kind of consider the conversations that I'll have with her and the way that I am with her. And I think that when she was at her dad's house one time, this didn't necessarily happen. And so here's a scenario. This was around remembering 9/11, and she was there at their house, and she's watching these images of the towers blowing up and, people falling from the building and all of that. And she was probably 4.5. It was way too much for her. She just took it all in, not really knowing what questions to ask, but she was just in that setting. And so at the end of the night, she had nightmares, and she was like, I want my mom. And so I was, just trying to ask, kind of what happened over the day. And she kind of articulated that just a little bit. I know something happened. What was that? And I feel like if we're going to have think about opportunities to have like those tough conversations, you have to build a schema for kids. You got to start somewhere. Like I think they'll see it modeled in the ways that you embrace other folks. And if you want to talk about race, you'll talk about lived experiences and how, you know, people of color experience the world and what racism looks like. You got to start with little stuff first, little bitty ideas, and then build on that. I think that sometimes when we go in, we almost want to go full bore, but we have to remember cognitively, children just aren't quite there yet. It'd be like saying, you know, you see an acorn fall from the tree and you say, oh, it's a brown acorn, it's round, it also has this texture and also this, and then the kid just kind of disengages because you're giving too much like at the same time. So I think you do have to take into account temperament, what age your children are, and start to think about how much they can take. When you see those physical cues, when they can't verbalize, you're talking too much, I don't even know what you're talking about, you've gone way over my head, you know, pay attention to that and then draw back. Create another space and another opportunity, another time. And then that's, another opportunity to build on that conversation.
Great. It makes me think about when I read the children's book, Something Happened in Our Town, a children's story about police brutality with my 3-year-old, and read through the book and asked him at the end, so what do you think about this? And he said, I don't know yet. And I said, wow, I don't know yet either, right? Like that is our kids sometimes can say really honest, like how they're actually feeling. I don't know yet. That's wow, okay, you're overwhelmed with this. This might've been too much. Let me pull back. Let me think about this as a longer journey rather than we got to build your skills around anti-racism in the week, you know? Jordan, what would you add there around advice for talking with children?
Okay, so I got a few things and I'm gonna try and make it bite-sized. My first thing is always preach hope, teach action. And that's, by the time we come to this work, look, we've already been beat up a little bit. We're a little hardened. If you've had to live under the oppressive system, we definitely do the like, I can't afford to have you be a child because I know that the system is going to take your childhood from you. And we can shake our heads at, but we know the reality, right? Like, and I catch myself doing it to my daughter sometimes. There are things that she just doesn't get to do. Like I still remember the first time I tried to walk out of the house with a hoodie on, and this is long before Trayvon Martin. I remember my mom telling me, don't you dare walk out like that. They need to be able to see your face. That is a reality. But I was never without hope. I never thought that as bad as things are, we couldn't do something. And so at any age, we are still preaching hope. The world can be better. The world has to be better. Even if you look at some of our most damning quotes, you know, James Baldwin's God gave Noah the rainbow sign, no more water, the fire next time. Well, take that a step further. Why are we doing water? Why are we doing fire? We're washing and burning things away from before so that we can make something new. Right? That's still hope now. It's radical hope. It is hope that demands action. It is hope that at times demands action that people may not agree with, but that's where we start. And so when you're talking to your little kids, if they want to go play with somebody that looks completely different from the park, first and foremost, don't do that right now because it's still COVID. Wash their hands. Fast forward, if they are talking to people that look different, if they're showing interest in books and things, that's part of the work for them if they're 3, 4, and 5. Next big thing, no trauma before 3rd grade. Look, this doesn't mean don't talk to them about the world. Doesn't mean they can't learn what's happening. But what we don't want to do is knock them down so hard that they can't get back up. Right? Like we don't want to show them that these things are so big and so bad that at their age, there's nothing they could do. And I always come back to, if you remember writing to the president or to the governor, adults, we know they didn't read it, but that kid doesn't. They are still obsessed and loving the idea that someone wrote back to them, that they could have pushed for change. And then you can still make it local. Have them write to their alderman so that when they see them, they know that they had some impact. That's teaching action, and it's something that will get them to the next step, because that action has to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And the best thing I can give for speaking with your kids, if you don't know, say you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, like, the thing that I always hung my hat on when I was in the classroom is, at times, the best thing that we do is show our kids how a well put together adult handles their life.
Mm.
And that includes, I cry. My heart can be broken. I can be disappointed. But you know what I still do the next day? I get up.
That's right.
We work. We heal. And we take that time. And that's how you talk with your kids. If they're telling you, you know what? I just want to watch Mickey Mouse Club today because we talked about a lot yesterday, or I saw a lot of people who were sad. I don't have it. Great. You probably don't either. But we can't be so hyped up. We can't be so demanding that the world change that we forget they've got way more time than we do. And they're going to come to it in the ways that are best for them, for the world that they're living in. But preach hope, teach action, no trauma before 3rd grade. And sometimes the best thing we do is show them how a well put together adult handles their life.
Great, thank you. Both great suggestions from both of you. I think Jordan, you said coming to it in a way, right, that like it works for them or it fits with them. We know about the power of books, of children's stories, and there are questions coming in about your recommendation of Little Leaders, Bold Women in Black History. Curious from both of your perspectives, Jordan, maybe about that book specifically, but then any other recommendations for children's stories that can start a conversation or that can serve as a jumping off point.
All right, I'm going to say something on Little Leaders, and then I'm going to go actually grab some of Mimi's books because she's not in her room. I love Little Leaders, and we have it in her room because, first and foremost, the revolution doesn't happen without Black women. And that's just factual statement, be mad at facts. But we separate so many of those stories out that I find that that's a great book to get them started, to think about whose story hasn't been told. Because everybody talks about Martin Luther King, not everybody talks about Fannie Lou Hamer. Everybody talks about the fact that we have Martin Luther King Jr.'s holiday. Nobody wants to talk about the fact that that was Coretta Scott King's life mission. So we, you know, that's a great book to open a bigger conversation. And then I'm going to go grab some other books because Keila has better ones. I'll be right back.
Keila, go for it.
Yeah, so I have to be honest, my space right now has been mostly with adults.
Yeah.
So looking at really good books, I always think about how the book reads and if it's just a good book, period, right? Like I look at the illustration of it. There are some books out there and it makes me wonder and question, who is this book written for? It seems like it's written like more for adults who feel like I'm doing the right thing by giving this to my kid. But I would wonder, like, there's a really popular one, and I won't even name who it is and what that book is. I've read it. And the illustration's a little off-putting if I think about the age group that they're thinking about, and the alliteration of it, like how it repeats and rhymes and things like that. You still want something that's pleasing. For me, of course, my context is all young children. And so I think about rhymes and I think about alliteration and things like that. It should still be that type of book. Whether you're talking about the little black boy with curly hair or the, you know, a girl's skin color, anything like that, a book that reads well is extremely important. So I'm very honest with that. Right now, I'm all in adult space right now.
Yeah, that's great. I'm going to come back to that because I think parents are probably also looking for those suggestions around adult books, but I see Jordan's back. Any others you found?
All right, here is A is for activist. So this is the ABCs all the way to Z, and each letter is about social growth. So M is for Mayday. X, Z is for Zapatista, because of course. X is for Malcolm X. Y is for you. So A is for activists.
Jordan, what age would that book be for?
So I use this in my middle school classrooms, and I just extended the activity. So it was great for Z is for Zapatista. If you got a middle schooler who doesn't know about the Zapatista movement, there's their research project. So how I would utilize it is different, but I loved picture books in my middle school and high school classrooms because you didn't have to worry about the fluency.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes, I don't know why we think that kids stop wanting to be read to. I don't get it. So I still read picture books, and I think this is a great one because it does have a revolutionary slant. You can tell them to go research the things in here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's accessible. The harder part is the research skills.
Yeah.
It's great.
May Amongst the Stars. So this is a kid's book all about Mae Jemison.
Mm-hmm.
And this one, again, I would say K6. You could use K8. Woke. And so this is full of poems about, social justice. And it has, it covers everything from ableism to body positivity. Another one that I read these as bedtime stories to my daughter. She may not get the full weight of them, but that's awesome because wouldn't you love to go back and tell 4-year-old you that there was this poem that just talked about how it was okay to love yourself?
Mm-hmm.
Like sometimes that is like, it's easier for us to front load some of these messages so that on the back end, we're not hustling as much.
Mm-hmm.
If you haven't gotten Anti-Racist Baby already, for all the adults that picked up how to be an anti-racist, this is for them. Because, Anti-Racist Baby is bred, not born. Anti-Racist Baby is raised to make society transform.
Mm-hmm.
Harlem's Little Blackbird, this is another great one. It's a story of Florence Mills. Big Hair, Don't Care, and I especially saw a question from a parent of a biracial daughter. My daughter is biracial, and it's easier at times to address the differences that she feels. So her hair, like I said, is a really big one. This was gifted to her, and whenever she is having some of those self-confidence issues, we just throw our hands above our head and say, I love my hair.
Big Hair, Don't Care. I second that. Love of it. Yep. Read it to my baby all the time.
Come on. I Like Myself. This is a great one because it just deals with I like myself. I like myself no matter what. I like myself however I am. This is great for all kids. If they're kids of color, if they're Black kids, even better because it does center a young child of color. But there's also, and we're just going to call attention to it because sometimes it takes me a second to notice these little things. She does tell, big hair, because big hair don't care. So if people stop and stare and try to say that all that they see of me is the only thing that matters, it doesn't matter. So she actually has interactions with police officers. And the whole point of it is it's not confrontational. It's I just love me. And who I am and all the things that I am are more important than just what you see. And that is where they take it. So I think those are all great recommendations. I got all of those, the ones that were gifted to me from Volumes or 57th Street Books. So I love doing independent bookstores because that's how you get more. If you want bookstores in your community, you should shop at the bookstores in your community.
Love that. And we can put a couple of those independent bookstores in the chat. Kiddo is another great one. KIDO, I think a lot of the books you shared, I was like, seen that on Kiddo's website, seen that one. One of the things that I said on the last call, but I know we have some new people joining, is the idea to do an audit of your child's library, especially if you're a parent of a white child, right? How many books do you have that center white kids versus centering Black kids or kids of color? I know I've been shocked at the number of books that are sort of books but have a character among 6 who is Black or who is a child of color, and it still centers that white kid. So really examining that as well. Two things I want to go to. Keela or Jordan, any recommendations specifically for those adult books, parents who are in the space of, I want to read more, I've read Stand from the Beginning, I want, whatever, any of those go-to adult books, and then I want to switch to educators, the question that's in the chat, and we'll talk about that too. But Keela, any adult books that you would recommend?
Yeah, some of my favorites, of course, White Fragility, like I still refer back to that one. I do love it because it also has a discussion guide. So, you know, if folks are looking for a way to maybe pull some people together and kind of move through that book together, it offers that. There's one that I'm getting to, it's called So You Want to Talk About Race. That I was recommended by some other colleagues. And then there's one that is written by a lady who's a theologian. She's like, I bring the voices of my people. And she's an academic theologian also, and works in higher ed, and talks about, you know, her bringing her whole self into predominantly white spaces and how she stands on the voices of her people. It's really brilliant. And I had 2 recommendations for podcasts for folks who like those. Seen on Radio has Seen Whiteness, and it just gives a really good historical perspective of, you know, where whiteness kind of started, white supremacy, and a whole lot of stuff. It's really great. It also has a discussion guide. And then, yeah, that's good. I'll leave that there.
Great. Oh, Jordan, you're muted.
I second So You Want to Talk About Race, stamped from the beginning, The Color of Law. So I think some of the ones that we really, if you really want to get into some of the work, it isn't just the like, let's think about the individual ones, but like the bigger issues. So Ghost in the Schoolyard by Dr. Eve Ewing is a in-depth look at how we got to our current educational system in Chicago, and like school closures and how that even influences, you know, disparities. Color of Law is a long-term look at like policies like redlining, policies related to like where do banks even want to open, and how that perpetuates racism and poverty. Lisa Delpit's Other People's Children is an old one, but I always think it's great to go back to that. They also have Multiplication is for White People from Lisa Delpit as well. Oh crap, what else did I read? Oh, High Risers, which is a full history of public housing in Chicago. And so you also get intersections between policy, race, economics, education. And yeah, I'm sure others will come to me, but those are the ones top of the head now.
I appreciate that. I think for me, I've found that sometimes it's not about necessarily the books I choose to read with my son, but if I've read something, for me, it might lead me to ask a different question about the book we were already going to read, right? The children's book we're already going to read. I'm approaching it with a different lens because of something that I internalized. So just that reminder for parents not to even if we're thinking about it for our kids, that the work we do for ourselves really matters. I'm curious if we could talk a little bit about schools. So there was a question that was submitted about parent of mixed race kids. I would like to learn how to better address the small aggressions that kids like mine face daily when they attend predominantly white schools. More often than not, I find myself angry at the school admins for not stepping up and for letting racist kids or parents get away with it. And I think that's an important question, not just for parents of mixed race kids, but also white parents or parents of white kids, right? To think, like, how should we hold our schools accountable? What should we be asking for from schools right now? And I know it's a hard time to be asking from schools given COVID, but tell us, and Jordan, I know you've been an educator in public schools, so curious to hear your perspective on this.
Were you passing out to me? Oh, okay. So I was just, as a parent, there were certainly microaggressions. We live in a neighborhood and our school is predominantly white out here in Aurora, DuPage County. And I always centered Kayla in the conversation when I would bring this up, and center her feelings and her emotions, which are a critical part of her learning. And there was a time where there was an assembly, and during the assembly, she didn't want to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. And her teacher had already prefaced that with, you know, if you're not standing, then, you know, we're going to have a conversation later, and a couple other things she said after that. And so didn't even go to the teacher. I talked to the principal and everybody, and he wanted to side with the teacher. And I centered Kayla in that conversation and not me. I want to bring all my racial equity, social justice, and everything all into the conversation. And then Mama Bear was there too. I kind of put her at bay so that I could say, if she's uncomfortable being able to express herself, you know, in this setting, like, how do you expect for her to be able to connect with you, to be able to learn in that setting? And this is what you said, and sort of this is what you did, you know. And I kind of wanted her to own that. It took about 15 minutes of jogging around the conversation for her to say, okay, you know, yeah, I did that. And I see where it could have been offensive. Well, thank you. Like, it's the validation of that that is important to me. And so I think the tool here is to center the child's social emotional growth. You know, even as a teenager in high school, she's experiencing that. And so for somebody who might be younger and not able to experience that or articulate it, it's important to talk about like their development in that way and be a champion and, you know, call them to the carpet. Shoot, you know, you would about an A or a D that they got, you know, so why not that?
Yeah. I think is it a call out or a call in? So there's a few things
Thank
about
you.
So are you addressing the individual? That's where I start. So everything else is great except this one teacher. Then I handle that. That's one-to-one, right? Especially considering my daughter's not old enough to go fight her battles yet. So that's still one-to-one, especially the first time. I jokingly tell people, you get my PR rep the first time I come talk about my child. That's, you know, generally who you all are getting right now, very calm. Second time you mess with my child, that's dad, and dad is here to fight for their kid, right? But that's still a call in. That's still me going one-to-one to handle this issue. And a call in, and I kind of put the questions that I have to go through myself, and look, ain't anybody done working on me yet? What do I need to happen? Who has the power in the situation? And how do I want to make that happen? So if it's just this one teacher and they're just being an issue and I try talking to them through a call in, well, now it's time to call you out. Now I'm going to your principal. Now I'm going to the school board. Now I'm going to whoever has power over you, because you had power over my child and you abused it. If it's the whole school, you can attack systems. Like how I treat individuals versus how I treat systems are very different because there's a power dynamic. You can rant you can go at CPS all day because that is a system. Individuals with power, you handle differently unless their platform is big enough that they can't, you know, that like you're not creating a disparity. But if it's somebody that like, you know, when I was a board member for organizations, I didn't punch down. So I'm not going to call out people that I actively have power over. And I think really being cognizant of that, because at least when I was in the classroom too, there are some things that like I had to enforce, wasn't my decision. And the reality of it. So that was a call in, and I would tell parents that in my most professional way. Like, I can't say that I agree with the policy, but what I will say is I'm going to make the relationship right, and I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that they're not negatively impacted by that again. And I would call back to the policy, and I would like parents to know that if there is a policy that a parent is unhappy with, as a teacher at the school at times, I may or may not have the ability to change that policy, but I know who does. And so I think that's where you really need to think about it. Who has the power? What do you want to see change? And how far are you willing to go to get it changed? Like if it's a school policy that they have to stand, you can be mad at me for enforcing it, but then you're asking me, like, at a certain point, what am I willing to sacrifice? And that's a tough question. But if the policy's wrong, fight the policy.
Great.
You know, I thank you for differentiating that, the call in rather than the call out. And that's kind of a guiding principle that we have in our book study when we're having these kinds of conversations. So I appreciate you reminding me of that. And I also want to say too, you're going to speak to a policy. One thing when I was having the conversation with the principal, and not the individual teacher, I did that on purpose, was to talk about their values. Like that's what I speak to rather than the policy. So at that school, it's about children flourishing and, protecting like their spirit in that. And so that's what I was trying to speak to. If you're really concerned about the individual child, though you've got all of these kids to educate, what about that one and how you interacted with her in that setting and at that time?
I love that. Keela, I think that circles back to one of the things that we talked about before, and I'm going to transition us to close here because I know we're just at time, but that coming back to us being human, right? We're human, we have values, and many of those values are shared. So how do we make sure that we're bringing that to the forefront of the conversation when talking about and centering our kids? So I'm gonna bring back up the screen. I want to say thank you so much to you both for coming here and having just an incredible, enjoyable, rich conversation. There were questions flying in. I think we answered a lot of them. I know that there were many recommendations given. We will try to source those from Keela and from Jordan so that we can send it out in a follow-up email. Also, today's conversation has, like I said, been generously hosted by our lead series sponsors, Lindy Hirschstone and Chris Coetzee, and Lindy and Michael Kaiser, but VOCEL relies on donations to continue the work that we do. So if you enjoyed this today, if you want to attend the upcoming ones, please register. The dates are right there at the bottom of your screen. They're all also available on vocel.org. But if you'd like to donate and contribute financially to our work and keep these types of engagements going, you can text the word VOCEL to the number you see there on your screen, or you can go to vocel.org/donate. Either way is great. We don't care how you send us money. It allows us to keep doing the work that we do. Thank you again to Keela and to Jordan, and thank you all for joining. And we hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye, everyone.